The final piece to your field service implementation is thinking about how you're going to handle inventory management and purchasing of information and returned merchandise and managing inventory in between warehouses. And that's kind of the final piece to the puzzle. So the thing to remember though is in a lot of the implementations that you might be doing, you may be looking at some type of integration with some other application that might be handling some of your purchase order processing or your return to vendor information and some of those items. So there may be more of an integration piece that comes into as part of the field service situation. However, the application does have inventory management capabilities. So if you want to look at snapshots in regards to what you have inside a specific warehouse or what particular items you have on trucks, you do have the capabilities to manage and maintain some of that information by utilizing some of the analytics and reporting capabilities available from here. So what I want to look at in this module is really just provide more of an overview in regards to what some of these capabilities are. Depending upon the type of implementation that you're doing and the integration pieces that you might have, there may be different avenues that this is all coming into play from, where they may or may not even be 100% maintained within the application. But it's important to at least understand from a configuration perspective what field service capabilities do allow you to do from an inventory management standpoint. So we're going to talk a little bit more about customer assets. We've talked about them kind of on and off throughout the entire part of this course. We're going to look at them in a little bit more detail and understand what they are and how they're used as part of the application. We're going to talk a little bit about the purchasing process and what's involved with purchasing information inside field service, and talking about handling inventory management and looking to see what specific inventory items that you have at individual warehouse locations or truck items and how to manage some of those inventory adjustments and transfer inventory from one area to another. And we're also going to talk a little bit about the return process and how returns can be handled inside the application and what that process looks like from a step-by-step procedure. So let's first talk a little bit about customer assets. And so we've mentioned them on and off, like I said, as we've gone through this course in regards to being able to be associated with different items. But let's talk a little bit about what is a customer asset. If you think about a customer, they're going to have pieces of equipment, or they're going to have items that you may or may not service at their specific location. So if you sell them a printer, that is now a serviceable item that you would be ultimately servicing as you're moving forward. Or if you sell somebody a refrigerator, they now have a refrigerator that you can service as you're moving forward. And so what a customer asset is a list of all of those individual items. And if you think about now how things are working from a connected standpoint with IoT and smart devices, a lot of these new serviceable items might have smart cards in them, or items that would, from a smart device standpoint, that would phone home or be able to communicate back and trigger alerts and report functionality back. That's one of the nice things about the customer asset standpoint, is that now leads us into kind of the next level of field service when we start talking about some of the connected field service capabilities, where if you have IoT connected devices and they're listed as customer assets, you can now have those items trigger alerts inside the application. Now that's part of the connected field service solution, which again is an additional piece to this that's a little out of the scope of this particular course, but that's the next level to what you would be thinking about when you start talking about field service implementations. So one of the things that's nice about these customer assets is obviously you want to be able to just record specific information about that particular item. What is it and what's happened within those scenarios? But ultimately, as you're performing these work orders and you're dispatching people out on site, we're now going to be able to maintain kind of a log of all the work orders that have been associated with that particular customer asset inside the application. So now I can really start to see if we've had problem devices or if we've had situations that really maybe constitute an escalation or a next level, and maybe define how we want to move forward with that from that standpoint. But again, if you start looking at some of the connected options, it also gives you a little bit more flexibility when you start talking about how you're going to work with them from there. The nice thing about assets is there's a couple of different ways that you can do that. You can either add an asset manually for a physical service location, or you can actually do it as part of kind of the work order process. When you think about like products and services and those options, one of the things that you can do when you start adding products in, if it's associated with a specific work order, once that work order is completed and has been marked as a completed work order, you now would have the capabilities to automatically have that that product that was associated with that work order be converted to a customer asset. So it is now listed as a customer asset for that particular customer, and you now have that item that you can start using and servicing items against in the past, and you can open those up for specific work orders. So what I want to do now is just take you into the app a little bit and just do a little bit more with customer assets so you can see specifically how they might work inside your deployment. So if I navigate over into Field Service and I go into Customer Assets, here's where I can see a list of all the different customer assets that we have for this particular implementation. So now I have all of the different customer assets that are associated with this. If I go ahead and I open up a specific one of these assets, I'll be able to see more specific details about it. Obviously, some of the key aspects or the key points that you're going to be able to see around this particular asset is, what it is, what account it's associated with. Now, maybe this is an item that has kind of a parent associated with it. So maybe you have a variety of different switches, or you have a rack that has multiple assets or multiple items associated with it. This is where you would now be able to see and associate it with kind of a parent asset or a master asset that you would be working with. You also have the capabilities to associate this with specific specific products inside the application, and then you also can see if it's a work order product. So for example, if this initially was created, or we initially converted this to a customer asset based upon the fact that it was associated with a work order that we created in the past, I would be able to see that that particular item in here was coming from that particular work order. So here's the work order product from that item that has now been associated and created with as part of this asset. As I'm going through and I'm creating different work orders and I'm working with different items, as I associate work orders with this particular asset, they will now start to show up in here from a historical standpoint. So I can get kind of a 100% view in regards to what is happening within those individual products. So these customer assets are a great way that you can start servicing your specific locations. So now let's just go back into work orders. And inside my work order, I'm going to go ahead and create a new work order. Let's just associate it with Fabricam here quick. And we'll use Fabricam Residences. Now I'll come down, we'll associate it with a specific incident type. But now if I come down into this situation, if I have an asset that I want to associate it with, this is where I could come into and I can associate it with specific assets that I would want to work with from that standpoint. So now I could come into here, I could pick an asset that I want to associate this particular work order with, and now when I create that work order, that is how it will show up. So this gives me the capabilities now to associate this particular work order with a customer asset. So now I can hit save and close, and if I were to go back into the application, I could see that particular item directly from within there. Another aspect that Field Service supports is purchasing. Now again, from a purchasing perspective, it really depends upon the type of deployment that you're working with and whether or not you're going to deploy the entire kind of inventory management standpoint. So from this, with purchasing and with returns, we're going to really just talk about the concepts and the capabilities that they have from within the Field Service implementation. So from a purchasing standpoint, obviously somebody's going out onto a site and now we need to return or we need to receive products, or we need to have additional products that we're reporting that we need. That's where purchasing comes into play. So it allows us to basically go out and create POs. We can identify what specific products we want to associate with on that particular PO and the vendor that we need to work through that item from. We can then submit that for approval. So if there's a managerial process involved with approving that PO, we can gain approval from the manager from that standpoint. And then once those products have come in, we can create what's called a PO receipt, which will then define that information. So Field Service does support from a purchasing as well as from a return standpoint, that entire process as far as how you want to create that. But you're first going to create a PO. You can submit that PO for approval. Your managers can then approve that PO, and then you can go on and confirm that you've received the product as part of that information by receiving a PO receipt. As you're creating these warehouses. So for example, you might have multiple warehouses within your implementation. You might have warehouse 1, warehouse 2. You might have multiple trucks. You might have Derek's truck, you might have Henry's truck, truck 1, truck 2, however you want to work with them. Each one of those items would be considered a warehouse. And when you have a warehouse, those warehouses now can have inventory associated with it. I might have different types of switches or converters that are sitting out on trucks. I might have different elements or items that are being used to be stored at different warehouses as we're going through. As part of the field service area, you do have the capability to manage product inventory. So from within a specific warehouse, I can go in and I can see the specific available quantity that we have, quantity that has been allocated to specific jobs or specific projects. I can see what's available, and I can see what's on order. So I can see just kind of at a glance what's happening. Well, I can add individual products to this particular warehouse. I can also define and trigger reorder points. Now again, this is where integrations with third-party applications might come into play, because you may have some type of inventory management system that's handling some of that. But the nice thing about that is you at least have the capabilities to expose that visibility to that information inside the Dynamics 365 implementation through the field service capabilities. Now, depending upon how you want to handle inventory and inventory options within the field service capabilities, you would also have the capabilities to make inventory adjustments. So I would have a situation where a shipment of, let's just say, for example, refrigerators comes in, and those shipments have now been added to a specific warehouse. I need to go in and catalog those items against that particular warehouse and make additions and subtractions to the inventory items for that particular warehouse. Maybe I'm doing a transfer. Maybe I have somebody who is going out and being dispatched, and they're fixing washing machines, and now there's specific treads or there's specific belts that are used for most models of washing machines. I have all of those in my one warehouse. I am now going to take those items from that warehouse and I'm going to move 5 of them onto the truck that Derek drives. That would be an inventory transfer. And so the application gives us all of those capabilities to not only see what's happening from an inventory standpoint, but also to look at and monitor adjustments as well as transfers and inventory items from there. So if I first go into field service and I go into warehouses, this will show me all of the individualized warehouses that I have for this particular deployment. So I can see for here, I really only have 2. I have kind of our main warehouse where we keep most of our information, and then I have a truck that we will put information out to periodically when we're dispatching information out. If I open up each one of these individual options, so for example, if I open up truck 1, I can see just generalized information about the truck. I can see its overall name and description. But if I come over into here, I can now go over into product inventory. And this will pull up a complete product inventory list for this particular truck. So this will show me all the information that I now have. So it'll show me what's available, it'll show me what's on hand, it'll show me what I have available from an on-order standpoint, what might be allocated to different jobs or items that are going into there, and then at what point we should reorder this information. So I can see just at a very quick glance all of the individualized pieces that are associated with this. If I wanted to add a new product inventory item to this option, I could go into add new product inventory option. I could then go ahead and specify what that particular product or service or product is that I want to add to this option. So I can see what warehouse it's being associated with is truck 1. I can specify the unit that I want to use for that option. I can then go ahead and specify what product I want to associate with this and what the reorder point would be. Once I start adding and I start associating these individual products and services with specific work orders that are associated with specific warehouses, now I will start to see these quantities get adjusted based upon the fact that they're attached to individualized work orders. But that's how you can modify and kind of add a work order item or a product item to a specific warehouse. Now the other option that you have within here is getting into your inventory adjustments. So if I needed to make an inventory adjustment, this is where I could go in and create an adjustment record. Now these adjustment records were actually created when the information was imported into the system, but it at least allows you to see exactly what that process looks like. So if you go into the inventory adjustment record, I can see that I have an adjustment that was created for the main warehouse on this specific time. If I go into and expand the related items, I can see the products that are associated with that inventory adjustment. This is for each item that has been kind of brought into that situation. So I can see that there was a utilities table that was 49 of them were added. I can see that I have gradient coils. This is where I can go in and add an individual inventory adjustment option, and I can define what happened within that situation. So I can define if it was a quantity, or what was the quantity, what was the product, how many of that particular option did we do, and that would then be added as an inventory adjustment to that particular warehouse so I could work with it from there. Same thing with my inventory transfers. If I wanted to transfer inventory from one item to another, I could go into inventory transfers, create a new inventory transfer record. It's coming from my main warehouse and it's going to my truck. Now I'll save it. I'll go into my products. I'll add an inventory transfer. Specify the product I want to use. And then save and close, and then transfer that information across. Okay, I can see that I only have 14 on hand from that standpoint, so let's go back and switch this to 5, and we'll save and close again. And then it'll process the inventory transfer, and then I'll see the information into there. So the other thing that's nice is it does do real-time checking. So as you can see, it noticed that I was trying to transfer more items from one area that I actually had in stock in that particular location, and it notified me of that. So this is, from a management standpoint, this is a great way that you can go into these individual warehouses and just get a snapshot of what's actually taking place as you're moving forward. Field service does provide different options for handling returns. So for whatever reason, maybe a particular product needs to be returned back. It allows you to process returns in really one of 3 ways. You either need to return that product to a specific warehouse, you need to return that product back to your vendor, or you need to change equipment ownership for that individual product. Regardless of how you're doing it, all of your products returns are going to be initiated with an RMA. So that RMA is really going to designate the product that you want to return, the unit that you're using for that individualized product, as well as the quantity and the work order that was associated with, as well as the price list. So that's going to specify why you are trying to return that information from there. Once you work through that, you then will process that return. Now that return isn't going to really be finalized until an RMA receipt is created. That basically confirms that the correct number of product and the quantity was received in regards to that, as well as the person that returned that information. Once the RMA receipt is processed, then the inventory adjustment or equipment adjustment can be carried out or is carried out within the application. So from a return standpoint, when you start talking about working with returns inside field service, you basically have to create an RMA first. Once you create that RMA, you'll be able to associate products with that RMA. You'll then be able to go ahead and submit that RA for approval. So let's say, for example, I have to approve, or from a managerial perspective, I have to approve that return merchandise. I can then basically approve that information. That will then create and allow me to create an RMA receipt, add items to that receipt, and then basically return that back to the vendor if need be, depending upon the type of return that I'm processing. Depending upon what you're looking at, the inventory and the billing procedures are ultimately going to at least be a conversation that you have to have. And the nice thing with the field service capabilities is it does allow the capabilities to process that information, whether it's creating warehouses and then adding specific inventory products to those warehouses, and then controlling how you want to transfer and maintain product in between those warehouses, to understanding that service technicians might be out on site and they need to request additional products to create POs and then receive those POs, or even a product that may be returned by a specific customer. The capabilities are there depending upon the type of implementation, whether or not you want to kind of configure and deploy that. And so one of the things that we talked about is what were those different situations, and understand that within those requirements of the implementation, are you going to be doing inventory management? Again, the other key conversation that you need to have is, if we're going to be doing inventory management, are we also going to be doing inventory management from the perspective that we are going to be integrating with a third-party application, and what does that integration process look like? Or are we maintaining the integration or maintaining the inventory management process directly from within field service? In those situations, now you do have the capabilities to set up your warehouses, define what specific items that you want to work with from an inventory procedure, add that into those individual warehouses, and now you can start adding and working on those items from a work order standpoint. If you need to process returns, or if you need to process purchase order situations, you now have the capabilities to bring that in. Regardless, you need to really look at how that fits into the overall implementation and how you're going to handle that information to determine whether or not you're going to take advantage of the functionality inside field service, or if you're going to utilize some of the functionality from an integration perspective, and then how you're going to move that process forward as you're moving. So we've now kind of gone from start to finish. We started looking at, how does that work order creation process look like? What are the methods and items that we're going to use to define and create work orders inside the application? We've then gone into the scheduling and dispatching scenario. We've talked a little bit about how are you going to handle scheduling and the actual dispatching of the individual resources for those specific work orders. Are you going to go ahead and use the schedule board to do that, or are you going to go ahead and use the scheduling assistant? Then we looked at the delivery. We went into the mobile application, and we looked at how field technicians can go in and they can interact with that information from that standpoint. And then we talked a little bit about the inventory management and the reviewing and the billing. And so we've looked at all those different pieces to that puzzle as you're working forward. And that's really the critical aspect that we wanted to bring across as part of this course. So as a recap, let's just talk about the specific things that we've gone through from kind of start to finish. So initially we looked at just what is the field service environment look like? What is the need for field and service in a specific organization? And how does the Dynamics 365 field service application fit into those specific situations? We talked about some of the key components that are available into that, and how you would actually go ahead and use some of those items moving forward, as well as looking at kind of a start end-to-end demo for that particular option. We then went in and talked about setup and configuration, and we looked at how you would go ahead and set up things like the warehouses that you want to work with, how you would set up the territories that are going to be serviced as part of the implementation, how you can associate postal codes with those options. We talked about defining resources and setting up resources and defining a resource as either a user-defined resource or maybe a contact or an account inside the application. We looked at inventory, or we looked at products and setting up the products that are going to be associated with your specific work orders that you're going to schedule. And we looked at how services can be created. And we talked about creating non-inventory and inventory-based items within the application. And then we went into work order management, and we showed you how work orders can be created in a variety of different ways, whether that's manually just by going in and creating the work order inside the system, or whether that's going in and converting a work order from a case or from an opportunity inside the application. And we talked about the different components that make up a work order. We talked about incidents and how you can create incident types inside the application that can do things like pre-populate some of the service tasks, and those service tasks would represent items that would need to be accomplished while that person was working on site. We talked a little bit about how all of that information can now be pre-populated as part of the workflow, or as part of the work order when it's created within the application. And then we looked at the dispatching and scheduling options, and we brought into the schedule board, and we looked at how you can look at an overview of all of your different resources that you're working with, and how you can define for each one of those individual resources how you can drag a specific work order up into their calendar and assign them a specific item based upon that. We looked at the scheduling assistant and how you can use the scheduling assistant to go in and get a little bit more granular control and be able to kind of filter that information down on even a much greater level based upon location of where that service location is and where that work order is actually going to be carried out. We looked at automation of creating workflows or work orders by going in and using agreements. And we talked about how you can create an agreement for specific customers and how you can associate and have work orders be auto-created on a specific schedule. And we looked at the fact that not only can you have work orders be auto-created, but you can also have invoices be auto-created. And we talked a little bit about how you could have multiple schedules for creating different types of work orders. So maybe you have to service somebody monthly and maybe you have to service somebody weekly. You could have two different schedules for the different types of services that you're looking at. We went into the mobility option. We talked about how to set up and configure the mobile field service application to connect to your Dynamics 365 environment. We talked about the differences between working with it in an online mode versus an offline mode, and we showed you how you can go in and actually work with the different bookings that are created and the work orders that are assigned with them as part of that individualized option. And then finally, we talked about some of the inventory and processing and purchasing options that are available inside the Microsoft Dynamics 365 field service solution. And we looked at how you can manage inventory per warehouse. We talked about creating purchase orders and the purchase order process. And we talked a little bit about working with return merchandise information from there. So that's pretty much what's going to do it for our look and our overview into the Microsoft Dynamics for field service capabilities. I hope you found it informational. I wish you all the best as we're moving forward. And again, my name has been Derek, and I want to say thank you very much for your time, everybody. Take care and have a good one.